let's talk about one of the team that I am very interested to see how they do this season, and that of course is Orlando City. So Orlando City last season, unfortunately, they missed out on the playoffs for the fifth time in their franchise history, and the weight of them making their first ever playoff appearance unfortunately has to wait another year as they finished the season with a record of 9, 10, and 15 with 37 points. They scored 44 goals last season, which definitely was not a lot, and that they were one of these teams that have problem in terms of goal scoring. But unlike some of these teams that have problems in terms of goal scoring because they don't create a lot of chances, this team is the opposite. This is one of these teams that they struggle to score goals, not because of lack of chances that they create, but because they are very poor in terms of finishing. At least very inconsistent in terms of some of the clinical finishing. Because last year there was games where Orlando City would be basically just shoot from everywhere and they wouldn't put one into the back of the net. And then there are some times when they don't shoot from everywhere and they put it into the back of the net. Inconsistency was the big theme of this team, and it's not only play in terms of the resort, but also in terms of the goal scoring too, where there's some times where they look very clinical, and then there's some times that they just forgot their shooting boots and just basically being very well in terms of shooting from everywhere. And they of course conceded 52 goals and had a goal differential of -7. Last season summary, they finished second from bottom of the Eastern Conference, but just because they didn't, when you look on the table and they finished near the bottom of the table, doesn't mean the fact that they really necessarily had just a horrendous season. You know, when you look at all those teams that was below the red line in the Eastern Conference, they're kind of tightly bunched up, and that most of those teams actually had a chance heading into the final day, but unfortunately Orlando City, I believe they lost that game on the final day, and they of course fall themselves all the way down to 11th. And then they also got eliminated in the semifinal in the U.S. Open Cup, and this one really hurts. Not only because they just missed out of potentially going to the final and potentially getting their first ever trophy in MLS, but they lose to a team that, yeah, it is the team that's been one of the biggest nemesis for Orlando City, and is one of the teams that a lot of Orlando City jokes comes from, which is Atlanta United. A lot of jokes about Orlando City has been that Atlanta United basically is the father of Orlando City, and that they basically own them almost like property, because it is the case. They never lose to Orlando City of all these meetings that they play, and that it's gotta be infuriating if you're an Orlando City fan, knowing the fact that not only you suffer a heartbreak of potentially getting to your first final in franchise history in MLS, but the fact that you basically suffered that loss to your most hated rival and the team that you just are the biggest nemesis, and the team that always is the team that tends to be the one that generate all these jokes about what Orlando City is in MLS. So yeah, that has to be very frustrating, but heading into this season, there is definitely positive and there is definitely hope, because not only this season, they might finally got a right hire to head to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history in Oscar Pereira, but I also said many times with Orlando City, I think they're the champion of the offseason, and that they really won this offseason and probably have the best offseason of any other team. Why is that? Well, they made some big acquisition during this offseason. Firstly, they signed Juan on a permanent deal, which is a massive signing for them, because Juan, last year, he was very good with this team, and he was one of the guy that kind of played kind of like a modern wingback kind of player, where when you see modern wingback player, not only they of course get back in terms of joining the defensive line of the back line, but they also go up field and trying to swing those crosses in and try to be creative too. That's what Juan was last year, and that it was so vital that they had him on the pitch. And there was times when I think they didn't have him on the pitch, and they lost some of that quality on the wing area. They also bought David Larea, Jordan Bender, Junior Uso, Pedro Gales, Andrea Pereira, Rodrigo Schickil, and Antonio Carlos, and all these guys that is after Junior Uso are the players that I mentioned throughout the news of the week and throughout pretty much in the off season, where these are the guys that they added that clearly will make Orlando City much better, and especially when you look at this squad with the way that they got a goalkeeper now that went to a Copa America final with Peru, and they got a couple of midfielders that will really boss that and control that midfield, and they got a couple of defenders that help shore up the goals, the sloppy goals that they can see last season, and that they are going to get a lot of upgrade in terms of the position that they didn't have last year. Now, in terms of players that is out with this team, you got Carlos Esquiu, Adam Greenwest, Christian Akita, Will Johnson, Sasha Kleshton, Cam Lindley, Shane O'Neill, Dylan Power, Greg Richardson, Main Sarne, and Jose Coleman as the player that is no longer on this team. And a lot of these players were starters with this team, and it also kind of just shows you that Orlando City is moving into a new direction, and that they get rid of all these players that they feel like is not going to really move them into the next level and finally get them to the playoffs. And now they're signing these young South American, well, not really young South American, because there are some of these guys that is kind of like around 28 and into their 30s, but some experienced South American player that is going to get them to the next level. Now, in terms of the goal scorer for this team, I mean, it has to be Nani. Consider he is the top goal scorer from last season, and I don't see how that is going to not be the case again this season. Playmaker, again, Nani. He is the guy that is the top assist guy from last season, and again, I don't see how he's not going to be the same thing when he's the creative player on this team. MVP, again, it's Nani, because he, not only I predict he's going to be the goal scorer, but he's also going to be the playmaker. And when you are a guy that I predict that you're going to be the playmaker and the goal scorer of this team, you're definitely going to be the MVP. Now, hopefully, with also some of the addition that they made in the offseason in terms of improving the midfield and also getting some creative playmaker, that can at least put some pressure off of Nani. I think last season there was time where they kind of over-rely on Nani, kind of similar to when Kaká used to be with Orlando City, and that Orlando City so rely on Kaká, and that it just, it's great that you are relying on a star-studded player like Nani, and he's going to bring quality to this team, but you can't just overly rely and have him be the guy that just be your main goal scorer and your main playmaker, and that you expect to potentially make the playoffs. You need to have a couple of players that can doesn't necessarily has to be as good in terms of scoring goals and being the playmaker as Nani is, but at least he could still contribute that and put a little bit less pressure in terms of Nani trying to kind of carry this team. Now, in terms of surprise package, I'm actually going to go with Benji Michel, and I know a lot of people probably don't recognize this name. He is actually a homegrown for Orlando City, and he actually made his debut in the middle of the season, and I believe he scored a couple of goals with this team in some limited appearance, and I really like this kid when he made his debut with Orlando City, and pretty much made a couple of string of games for the rest of the season. And when I see young kids that are either homegrowns with their team, but either a homegrown from their team, or the fact that they are coming from the draft and they are really stepping up in their first couple of games, I instantly think that they have some potential to be a very good player. And in the case of Benji Michel, I definitely see that he could have the potential to be a very decent goal scorer. I mean, I know, heading into next season, I'm not quite sure he's going to be a regular starter. I think the regular starter for this team in terms of striker position is Dom Dwyer and Teshin Akindele. But Benji Michel is definitely a good option for Orlando City to bring him off the bench. And hopefully, if he can continue that good form that he had in the latter part of the last season and in the part where he made his debut and for the rest of the season, he could definitely be a guy that I'm going to be watching out for, and he could definitely be a guy that in the future could be a very lethal goal scorer in this league. Now, what I like about Orlando City this season, well, or this offseason that is obviously their offseason acquisition. I mean, again, there's no doubt that they are the offseason champion with all these moves that they've been making. But having said that, just because they're the offseason champion, the big question I have is this group good enough to make the playoffs? And that in some way I can also kind of rephrase the fact that is this time of them being the offseason champion actually means that they're actually going to do well in the season. Because last time when I crowned them as the offseason champion a couple of years ago, they completely fell apart. And I just hope that it won't happen this season. And I don't know if it's going to happen because, not only the fact that I think they are improved in terms of their defense and the midfield, but they also got Oscar Pereira, who knows how to get young kids and who knows how to get the best out of South American player when he was down in FC Dallas. And there's definitely some decent young talent on this Orlando City team with a mix of South American players that have a bunch of experience that can definitely get this team to the next level of making the playoffs. So, there's that could make the case that they can finally make the playoffs. But again, we shall see if the resort, of course, would show that. And I guess maybe the other thing that I will also question about the fact that if this group is good enough, and if there is one weakness that I have with this team heading into this season, I would say it's probably going to be striker, because they are really hoping that Dom Dwyer can have a bounce back year. After last season, he was completely useless. Well, I wouldn't say he was completely useless because he still scored a couple of goals, but he was nowhere near where Orlando City want him to be the main goal scorer of this team, and especially when he first arrived to this team. So hopefully he does recover that form and he can at least be a 10-plus goal scorer on this team. I mean, the other guy that they have, Tesha Alcindeli, who could score goals, and I think last season he actually had his career high in terms of goal scoring marks. So, we don't know if he can do that again heading into the second part of the season. And then, as I mentioned, Benji Michel, I think, if you tell me that he should be one of the guys, as much as I think he is a talented player, he probably should not be the guy that you are really hoping that he can be your main goal scorer or your main striker that can, of course, score goals, because he's still a relatively young player. And, I think to kind of finishing up in terms of me talk about my concern about the striker position for them is that they didn't have a lot of striker that can put the ball into the back net, despite the fact that they had a lot of chances last season. Like, these striker needs to be more clinical, and that's one of the things that Orlando City has to improve this season, which is they need to be more clinical. Chances created, they're pretty good at it for most of the part, but it's all about that final product, which is putting the ball into the back of the net, and that is something that they got to improve heading into this season. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. If you're an Orlando City fan, what do you think of your offseason acquisition? What do you think is your main goal scorer, playmaker, and MVP, and what is your surprise package? And also, what do you like about this team, and what is one big question that you have with this team? Obviously, I think the other most obvious big question that a lot of fans has, and I was going to put that down here in terms of my big question in this box, is can they actually make it to the playoffs? I mean, I just think that if there's any fan base that deserves playoff success, and at least any fan base that at least experienced the thrill of being in the playoffs, it's got to be Orlando City. Like, this fan base, it's been frustrating for the first couple of seasons in their start in their life in MLS, but this could finally be the season where they can finally get over the hump and finally make a playoff appearance. And even if they don't make it deep into the playoffs, I think if this team does make it to the playoffs, at least they did something that no other Orlando City team has done, and can finally break that curse that they had in terms of having the longest active playoff drought of any team in MLS. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.